Welcome to Top 10 Secret, the place where we uncover the most chilling mysteries and darkest secrets. Today, we dive into 10 horrifying tales about blind kings, stories that will send shivers down your spine and keep you hooked. Get ready, because this journey is not for the faint-hearted. Story 1. The Blind King. In a realm where darkness reigned and the rain never ceased, a legend persisted of a twisted monarch who had ruled over the desolate land centuries ago. Known only as the Blind King, his name had been erased from history, leaving behind only whispers of terror and despair. The Blind King had not always been a tyrant. Once, he was a young, charismatic prince who ruled with a fair hand and a radiant smile. But power has a way of corrupting even the purest of souls. Consumed by his ambition, the prince sought a way to become eternal, to transcend mortality and rule forever. One fateful night, a cloaked figure appeared at the gates of his castle. The figure offered him a crown forged from the obsidian of the underworld, promising it would grant him unmatched power and eternal life. The prince, blinded by greed, accepted the crown without question. But as the crown touched his head, he felt an excruciating pain. His vision darkened, and his laughter twisted into an unending scream. The crown bound itself to him, blinding him forever. His eyes were veiled in shadows, but his grin stretched unnaturally wide, a permanent reminder of his folly. The once fair prince became the Blind King, an immortal being cursed to rule over a land plunged into eternal gloom. The crown gave him power, but at a great cost. His kingdom decayed. Its people turned into wraiths that served him in torment. The once lush lands withered into barren wastelands, and the sun never rose again. The rain fell endlessly, as though the heavens themselves wept for the king's damned soul. The Blind King grew madder with each passing year. Unable to see, he relied on his other senses to navigate his crumbling castle. He could hear the whispers of fear from his people, smell the rot of his dying kingdom, and feel the cold iron of his crown burning into his flesh. Yet he laughed, a hollow, haunting sound that echoed through the empty halls. "Bow to your king," he would say to no one in particular, his voice dripping with malice. "For I am eternal." Centuries later, the legend of the Blind King had become a cautionary tale told to frighten children. But for those brave, or foolish, enough to venture into the ruins of his castle, it was more than just a story. One stormy night, 4 travelers, Amelia, Victor, Lila, and Marcus, found themselves lost in the forest surrounding the cursed castle. The rain soaked them to the bone, and the distant sound of hollow laughter drew them closer to the ruins. "Maybe we can take shelter here," Victor suggested, pointing to the towering spires of the castle silhouetted against the stormy sky. Amelia hesitated. "You know the stories, don't you? The Blind King still lives in there." "Those are just tales to keep people away," Marcus said with a nervous chuckle. "There's no such thing as cursed kings." Reluctantly, the group entered the castle. The air was heavy, carrying the scent of decay and damp stone. The grand hall was lit by an eerie glow emanating from the walls, and the faint sound of chains rattling echoed in the distance. As they ventured deeper, they found a throne room at the heart of the castle. There he sat, the Blind King, still wearing his cursed crown. His head tilted slightly as if he could sense their presence. His grin stretched wider, and a low, guttural laugh escaped his lips. "Visitors," he said, his voice like nails scraping against stone. "How long it has been since I've had guests." The group froze in terror. The Blind King rose from his throne, his chains dragging behind him. Though his eyes were covered, it was clear he could sense their every move. "You've come to steal my crown, haven't you?" he hissed. "Fools! Do you think you can take it from me and not pay the price?" Victor stepped forward, trembling but defiant. "We don't want your crown. We're just looking for shelter." The blind king laughed louder, his voice reverberating through the room. Lies. All mortals crave power, but none are strong enough to bear the weight of this crown. The air grew colder as the king raised his hand, and the shadows around him began to writhe and take form. Dark figures emerged, their faces blank and featureless, their bodies twisted into grotesque shapes. The group turned to run, but the castle seemed to shift around them, the halls becoming a maze of endless corridors. The king's laughter followed them, growing louder and more maniacal. "You cannot escape me," he bellowed. "You are already mine." Lila tripped, and the shadows closed in around her. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. Victor grabbed Amelia's hand, pulling her forward as Marcus led the way. They found a stairwell leading to the tower, and they climbed desperately, the rattling chains and laughter chasing them. At the top of the tower, they found a small circular room with a glowing orb in the center. Amelia approached it, her instincts telling her it was their only hope. "What are you doing?" Marcus yelled. "We need to keep running." "No," she said. "This is the source of his power." The blind king's voice echoed from the stairwell. "Touch it, and you will suffer as I have." Ignoring the warning, Amelia placed her hands on the orb. A blinding light filled the room, and the king's scream pierced the air. When the light faded, the castle was silent. The blind king was gone, his crown lying shattered on the floor. The rain had stopped, and the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds. The remaining 3 travelers left the castle, vowing never to speak of what they had seen. But as they walked away, Amelia felt a strange weight on her head. She reached up and gasped. A crown had formed there, cold and unyielding. And far behind them, in the ruins of the throne room, faint laughter echoed once more. The blind king's curse had found a new host. Story 2. The Wailing Chains. Deep within the haunted woods of Blackmoor, where the light of the moon scarcely pierced the gnarled canopy of ancient trees, a dreadful figure roamed. Known only as the Wailing Chains, it was said to be the cursed spirit of a once living human, twisted into a grotesque form by centuries of torment. The skeletal creature, draped in chains that clattered with every movement, dragged its decaying body through the darkness, searching endlessly for something or someone to satiate its unrelenting hunger for vengeance. Centuries ago, the creature was known as Mariana, a young woman accused of witchcraft by the villagers of Blackmoor. Jealous of her beauty and frightened by her knowledge of herbal medicine, the townsfolk dragged her from her home and chained her to a wooden post in the village square. They called for purification by fire, their chants drowning out her cries of innocence. As the flames rose around her, Mariana's screams turned into curses. She swore vengeance upon the villagers and their descendants, vowing to drag their souls into the same eternal torment she would endure. Her body burned, but her spirit refused to die. The chains they had bound her with became part of her, fused with her skeletal remains as she transformed into a monster fueled by rage and sorrow. When the villagers awoke the next morning, they found the square empty. The ashes of the fire were gone, and so was Mariana's body. But from that day forward, anyone who ventured too deep into the woods claimed to hear the clinking of chains and the mournful wails of a tortured soul. None who heard the sound ever returned. In the present day, the legend of the Wailing Chains had become a cautionary tale, used to scare children and keep wanderers away from the cursed forest. But for a group of 5 young thrill-seekers, Jack, Emily, Sam, Lara, and Ben, it was the perfect opportunity for an adventure. "It's just a story," Jack said confidently as they gathered at the edge of the woods. "We'll go in, get some cool footage, and prove everyone wrong." Emily hesitated. "I don't know. My grandmother used to tell me this story, and she swore it was real. Come on, Emily, Lara teased. Don't tell me you're scared of some old ghost story. Reluctantly, Emily followed them into the woods. The further they went, the darker and quieter it became. The trees seemed to close in around them, and a dense fog settled over the forest floor. Ben, who was filming with his phone, shivered despite the warmth of the night. And then they heard it. A faint clinking sound, like metal dragging across stone. The group froze, their flashlights darting around the trees. "What was that?" Sam whispered, his voice trembling. "It's just the wind," Jack said, though his bravado was fading. The sound grew louder, accompanied by a low, mournful wail that seemed to come from all directions. The group huddled together, their breaths coming in shallow gasps. Then they saw her. The wailing chains emerged from the shadows, her skeletal frame hunched and her hollow eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Her chains slithered across the ground like serpents, their sharp edges glinting in the dim light. Her jaw opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and a chilling scream tore through the air. "Run!" Jack shouted. The group scattered, their panic driving them deeper into the forest. Emily tripped over a root and fell, her flashlight skittering away. She turned to see the creature stalking toward her, its chains writhing like living things. "Please," Emily cried. "We didn't mean to disturb you." The wailing chains paused, tilting its head as if considering her plea. Then, with a guttural growl, it lunged. Emily managed to scramble to her feet and run, her heart pounding in her chest. She reunited with Lara and Sam, who were frantically searching for a way out of the forest. "Where are Jack and Ben?" Lara asked, tears streaming down her face. "They went that way," Sam said, pointing to the right. "But I think..." Before he could finish, the chains struck. They shot out from the darkness, wrapping around Sam's legs and dragging him screaming into the shadows. His cries were cut short by the sickening sound of bones snapping. Emily and Lara ran blindly, the sound of the chains echoing behind them. They stumbled into a clearing where Jack was waiting, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Where's Ben?" Emily demanded. Jack shook his head. "She got him." The three survivors found themselves cornered in the clearing, the wailing chains slowly closing in. Her chains lashed out, slicing through trees and tearing into the ground. Jack grabbed a fallen branch and swung it wildly, but the creature's chains wrapped around his arm and pulled him into her skeletal embrace. He screamed as her jagged teeth tore into him, his body going limp in moments. Emily and Lara backed away, their eyes darting around for any means of escape. Then Emily remembered the old stories her grandmother had told her. "She's bound by her chains," Emily said, her voice shaking. "If we can destroy them, maybe we can stop her." "How?" Lara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily spotted a jagged rock on the ground and grabbed it. As the creature lunged for them, Emily swung the rock with all her strength, striking the chains that coiled around its body. The creature let out a deafening shriek, and the chains began to crumble, turning to ash. The wailing chains staggered back, her skeletal form flickering like a dying flame. She let out one final, mournful wail before collapsing into a pile of rusted metal and bones. Emily and Lara stumbled out of the forest as dawn broke, their clothes torn and their faces pale. They didn't speak of what had happened, but the haunted look in their eyes told the villagers everything they needed to know. The woods were quiet for the first time in centuries, the sound of chains silenced. But deep within the shadows, the air still carried a faint, mournful whisper, a reminder that some curses can never truly be broken. Story 3. The Grinning Haunt. In the small, isolated village of Ravenwood, nestled deep in the misty mountains, There was a tale that parents told their children to keep them obedient. It was the story of the grinning woman, a malevolent spirit who prowled the dark woods at night, her toothy grin wide enough to split her face. They said she was once a healer named Martha, known for her beauty and kindness, who lived on the edge of the forest. But decades ago, her kindness became her undoing. A desperate man from a neighboring village came seeking her aid for his sick wife. Martha agreed to help, not knowing the man carried a dark secret. When his wife succumbed to her illness, he returned, blaming Martha for her death. Fueled by grief and anger, the villagers turned against her, calling her a witch. One stormy night, they dragged her into the woods, chaining her to a tree. "If you truly have magic," they sneered, "save yourself." As lightning split the sky, her cries echoed into the void, unanswered. When dawn came, her body was gone, but the chains remained. The villagers whispered of a curse, but none dared enter the forest again. Years passed, and Martha's story faded into a ghost tale. Only one warning remained constant: never smile in the forest. One autumn evening, 4 friends, Kate, Marcus, Lila, and Tom, decided to test the legend. They were tired of the monotonous life in the village and wanted to prove that the old stories were just myths. "We'll go to the old oak tree," Marcus said confidently, holding up a flashlight, "the one where they said she was chained. We'll take a selfie there, smiling. Show everyone how stupid this legend is." Lila hesitated. "What if it's true? My grandmother said Martha comes for those who disrespect her." "Come on, Lila," Kate teased. "Do you really believe in a ghost who kills people for smiling?" Against her better judgment, Lila followed them into the forest. The air was colder than it should have been, and the trees seemed to lean inward, their twisted branches reaching like skeletal fingers. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. When they reached the ancient oak tree, it was larger and more menacing than they'd imagined. Its gnarled trunk was scarred with deep grooves, and rusty chains hung limply from its branches, swaying gently in a breeze that didn't exist. Tom laughed nervously. "Okay, here we are. Let's take the picture and get out of here." They huddled together, the flashlight casting eerie shadows on their faces. Kate held up her phone and grinned wide. "Say cheese." As the flash went off, a low, guttural laugh echoed through the trees. The group froze. Did you hear that?" Lila whispered. "It's just the wind," Marcus said, though his voice quivered. The laughter came again, louder this time and closer. It was high-pitched and unnatural, like nails scraping against glass. Then they saw her. She emerged from the darkness, her skeletal frame illuminated by the faint glow of the flashlight. Her long black hair hung in tangled strands, framing a face that was both horrifying and grotesquely mesmerizing. Her eyes were empty voids, and her mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged yellow teeth. Her grin was unnaturally frozen, a grotesque mockery of joy. She moved closer, her bony fingers twitching, her laughter filling the air with an unbearable chill. Kate dropped her phone and screamed, "Run!" They scattered in different directions, the flashlight falling to the ground and casting frantic beams of light through the trees. Marcus tripped over a root and looked up to see the grinning woman standing over him, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Why aren't you smiling?" she hissed, her grin widening. Before Marcus could scream, her hands clawed into him, dragging him into the shadows. Kate and Tom ran together, their breaths ragged, the laughter following them like a predator. They burst into a clearing, thinking they were safe, but the grinning woman was already there, waiting. "You think you can run?" she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. "This is my forest." Kate grabbed a large branch and swung it at her, but it passed through the specter as if she were made of smoke. The grinning woman reached out, her fingers grazing Kate's cheek, leaving a trail of frostbite. "Smile for me," she said, her grin splitting her face even further. Lila, who had been hiding behind a nearby tree, watched in horror. Summoning her courage, she stepped forward and screamed, "Leave them alone!" The grinning woman turned her hollow eyes on Lila. "You dare speak to me?" Lila held up her hands in a gesture of surrender. "Please, we're sorry. We didn't mean to disrespect you." For a moment, the grinning woman paused, her head tilting as if considering the plea. But then her laughter returned, more menacing than before. "Sorry?" she mocked. "There is no forgiveness here." By morning, the villagers found no trace of the four friends, only Kate's cracked phone lying at the base of the ancient oak tree. The last photo they had taken showed all four of them smiling, but in the background, just behind them, was the grinning woman, her face impossibly close. The forest was quiet that day, but the villagers knew better. They avoided the woods, their gazes averted from its dark edges, and whispered the same warning to their children: never smile in the forest. For the grinning woman still roamed, her laughter echoing through the trees, always searching for her next victim. Story 4. The Graveyard of the Restless. The full moon hung high in the ink-black sky, casting a cold silver light over Ravenhill Cemetery, a sprawling graveyard that had long been abandoned. The townsfolk spoke of strange happenings there: sudden mists, disembodied whispers, and shadowy figures that moved between the headstones. But one legend stood out above the rest: the story of Eleanor the Restless, a corpse said to crawl from her grave every full moon, searching for the living to drag back into the earth with her. Decades ago, Eleanor was a young woman who lived in the town of Ravenhill. Her beauty was unmatched, but her life was filled with tragedy. Accused of witchcraft after a series of unexplained deaths, Eleanor was sentenced to death by the terrified townsfolk. They buried her alive in the cursed soil of the cemetery, chaining her coffin shut to ensure she would never rise again. As the last shovelful of dirt was cast onto her grave, the ground trembled and a blood-curdling scream erupted from below. The townsfolk fled in terror, but a curse had already been unleashed. Each full moon, Eleanor clawed her way out of her grave, her decayed body driven by vengeance. Those who dared to enter the cemetery on those nights were never seen again. Years later, the legend of Eleanor became little more than a chilling tale told around campfires. For teenagers Jake, Mia, Tyler, and Aaron, it was the perfect excuse for a thrill-seeking adventure. "Come on," Jake said, holding up his phone to record their outing. "We go in, stay for an hour, and then leave. Easy. It'll make an awesome video." Aaron hesitated, her eyes darting toward the cemetery gates. "I don't know. My grandpa always said to stay away from this place." "Scared of a story?" Tyler teased, nudging her shoulder. "It's just some old legend. Nothing's gonna happen." Reluctantly, Aaron followed them through the rusted gates. The air inside the cemetery was colder than outside, and the silence was oppressive. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the distant hoot of an owl. As they ventured deeper into the graveyard, the group came across a weathered headstone marked with Eleanor's name. The ground beneath it was disturbed, as though the earth had been dug up recently. "This is it," Jake said, grinning as he aimed his camera at the grave. "The infamous Eleanor." Mia shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Let's just leave, okay? We've seen it. That's enough." But before anyone could respond, the ground beneath the headstone began to shift. A low, guttural growl echoed through the cemetery, freezing them in place. Slowly, a skeletal hand emerged from the dirt, its bony fingers clawing at the air. "Run!" Aaron screamed, but it was too late. Eleanor rose from the grave, her rotting face illuminated by the moonlight. Her empty eye sockets glowed with an unnatural light, and her skeletal grin stretched impossibly wide. Her hair hung in matted strands, and her decayed flesh clung to her bones in patches. She let out a blood-curdling shriek that sent the group scattering in different directions. Jake ran blindly through the rows of gravestones, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly. He could hear the clatter of bones and the scrape of nails on stone behind him. Panting, he turned a corner and slammed into Tyler, who was equally panicked. "She's right behind us," Jake gasped. "We have to get out of here." But as they turned to run, Eleanor appeared in front of them, moving with unnatural speed. Her bony hands lashed out, grabbing Tyler by the ankle and dragging him to the ground. His screams echoed through the cemetery as he was pulled into the earth. Jake stumbled backward, his mind racing. He ran toward the gates, desperate to escape, but the ground erupted in front of him, and Eleanor emerged once more. Her glowing eyes bore into him, and her skeletal grin widened as she reached for him. Meanwhile, Mia and Aaron had taken refuge in an old mausoleum. Aaron was trembling, tears streaming down her face. "We shouldn't have come here. This is all our fault." Mia grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to focus. "We're not dead yet. We need to find a way to stop her." Aaron recalled the stories her grandfather had told her. "The chains," she whispered. "They chained her coffin to keep her trapped. If we can find her coffin and seal it, maybe we can stop her." With no other plan, they crept back toward Eleanor's grave. The ground was still disturbed, and the broken chains lay scattered around the open pit. Inside the coffin, a faint glow emanated from the cursed soil that had sustained Eleanor's vengeful spirit. As they worked to replace the chains, Eleanor appeared, her twisted form silhouetted against the moonlight. She shrieked and lunged at them, her bony claws slicing through the air. Mia grabbed a fallen cross from a nearby grave and swung it at Eleanor, temporarily driving her back. "Hurry, Aaron!" she shouted. "We don't have much time." Aaron fumbled with the chains, her hands shaking. As Eleanor advanced again, Mia threw herself in front of Aaron, using the cross as a shield. Eleanor let out an ear-piercing wail and struck Mia with a force that sent her flying. Aaron screamed in defiance, securing the last chain and driving a rusted stake through the coffin. A blinding light erupted from the grave, and Eleanor let out one final bone-chilling scream as her body crumbled into dust. When dawn broke, Aaron sat alone in the cemetery, her clothes torn and her face streaked with tears. Mia was unconscious, but alive. Of Jake and Tyler, there was no sign, only freshly disturbed earth where they had last been seen. Aaron helped Mia to her feet, and the two stumbled out of the cemetery. Behind them, the air grew still, and the graveyard seemed to fall into an uneasy silence. Though Eleanor was gone, the villagers knew better than to believe the curse had truly been broken. And as the next full moon approached, the winds carried a faint, eerie whisper. "I will rise again." Story 5. The Lantern Keeper. On the outskirts of a forgotten village stood Grave Shadow Cemetery, a place shrouded in perpetual mist and tales of the supernatural. Beneath the pale glow of the full moon, it was said that a mysterious woman wandered the graveyard, holding a lantern that never dimmed. Her name was whispered as Alara, the Lantern Keeper. Alara was not like other ghosts or spirits. Her presence was neither entirely malevolent nor benevolent. She was a guardian of the dead, a watcher of the restless. It was said that if you crossed her path, she could either guide you to safety or lead you into eternal darkness. Centuries ago, Alara had been a healer, known for her compassion and wisdom. Villagers would come to her with their ailments, and she would treat them using herbs and mysterious rituals. But as her reputation grew, so did the fear of her power. Whispers of witchcraft spread, and when a devastating plague struck the village, the people turned on her, blaming her for their suffering. One stormy night, they dragged Ilara to the cemetery, chaining her to an ancient mausoleum. They lit a pyre around her, accusing her of communing with dark forces. As the flames consumed her, Ilara cursed the villagers, vowing to protect the dead from the living who had wronged her. When the flames died, her body was gone, but a lantern remained, burning with an otherworldly light. From that night forward, Ilara became the lantern keeper, her spirit bound to the cemetery. Those who entered after dark claimed to see her gliding between the graves, her lantern casting an eerie glow. Some said she guided lost souls to the afterlife, while others believed she dragged the wicked into the underworld. One fateful night, 4 travelers, Sophia, Ethan, Liam, and Clara, arrived at the cemetery, drawn by the legends. They were urban explorers, seeking thrills and proof of the paranormal. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and bravado, they ignored the villagers' warnings and slipped through the rusted gates. "It's just an old cemetery," Ethan said, trying to mask his nervousness. "We'll get some footage of the graves and leave." Sophia, the leader of the group, smirked. "Let's find the lantern keeper. Imagine the views we'll get if we catch her on camera." Clara hesitated, her gaze fixed on the twisted trees and shadowy mausoleums. "This doesn't feel right. What if the stories are true?" "They're just stories," Liam said, rolling his eyes. "Come on." As they wandered deeper into the cemetery, the air grew colder and an unnatural silence settled over the group. Their flashlights flickered and the mist thickened, swallowing the path behind them. Then they saw her. Ilara emerged from the fog, her black cloak billowing around her. Her lantern burned with a golden light, casting long, flickering shadows across the tombstones. Her face was pale and hauntingly beautiful, but her eyes were dark and unreadable. "Who dares disturb the resting?" Her voice echoed, soft but filled with authority. Sophia stepped forward, holding up her camera. "We're just exploring. We didn't mean any harm." Ilara tilted her head, her gaze piercing. "The living have no place among the dead." Clara tugged on Sophia's sleeve. "We should leave, now." But Sophia ignored her. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We just want to know, are you real?" Ilara raised her lantern and the light grew brighter, illuminating the graves around them. "If you seek the truth," she said, "then you must face it." The ground beneath them trembled, and the graves opened, revealing skeletal hands reaching for the surface. Shadows danced around the group, whispering in a language they couldn't understand. Ilara pointed her lantern at each of them in turn. "To the kind-hearted I offer guidance," she said, "but to the wicked I bring judgment." Clara fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't mean to disturb you. Please forgive us." Ilara's gaze softened as she turned the lantern toward Clara. "Your heart is pure. You may leave." Clara stood and stumbled toward the gate, the mist parting to reveal a clear path. But when Ilara turned to the others, her expression hardened. "You," she said, pointing the lantern at Sophia. "Your greed blinds you. You seek to profit from the sacred." Sophia tried to speak, but her words were drowned out by the whispers. The lantern's light engulfed her, and she let out a blood-curdling scream as the shadows dragged her into the earth. Ethan and Liam froze in terror. Ilara's lantern swung toward Ethan. "You followed for fame, not knowing the weight of your actions. Your ignorance spares you this time." The shadows receded, leaving Ethan gasping for breath. He ran after Clara, not daring to look back. Finally, Ilara turned to Liam. "And you," she said, her voice icy, "you laughed at the warnings. You mocked the dead." The lantern's light flared, and Liam collapsed to the ground, his body lifeless as the shadows claimed him. By dawn, Clara and Ethan were the only ones to make it out of the cemetery. They returned to the village, pale and shaken, but they told no one what had happened. The locals didn't need to ask. They knew the lantern keeper had passed judgment once again. As for Alara, she remained in the cemetery, her lantern burning bright. She continued her eternal vigil, protecting the dead from the living and ensuring that the sanctity of the graveyard would never again be violated. And so, the legend of the lantern keeper lived on, a haunting reminder of the boundary between life and death. Those who dared to enter Graveshadow Cemetery under the full moon would always remember the warning: respect the dead, or face the light of judgment. Story 6. The Keeper of Time. In the forgotten depths of the mortal world, where the sands of time moved slower than the beating of a dying heart, there existed a figure cloaked in mystery and dread. The Keeper of Time. His face was a skeletal mask etched with cracks and secrets. His eyes glowed with an eerie green light that pierced the soul, and in his hand, he held an ornate hourglass, its sands eternally flowing. He was the guardian of time, a being neither alive nor dead, charged with maintaining the fragile balance between life and eternity. It was said that the Keeper was once a mortal, a great king who sought to conquer not just lands, but the very concept of time itself. Obsessed with immortality, he bargained with a deity of the underworld, offering his kingdom in exchange for eternal life. The deity granted his wish, but at a terrible cost. The king was transformed into the Keeper of Time, bound forever to the flow of the hourglass, tasked with ensuring that every soul met its destined end. He became a myth, a shadow whispered about in hushed tones. Those who tried to cheat death, steal time, or disrupt the natural order were said to face his wrath. When the Keeper came for you, there was no escape. He would hold the hourglass before your eyes, letting you watch the last grains of your life slip away. One stormy night, a thief named Lorien crept into the ancient ruins of Eternus Temple, a place said to be where the Keeper rested between his duties. Lorien was not a simple thief. He was ambitious and desperate. He had heard the legends of the Keeper and the hourglass, and he believed that if he could steal it, he could command time itself. Armed with little more than his wits and a silver dagger for protection, Lorien ventured into the temple. The air inside was cold and heavy, the silence oppressive. The walls were carved with intricate depictions of life, death, and time, images of hourglasses, skeletal figures, and endless spirals. In the heart of the temple, he found the Keeper. Cloaked in white, with his skeletal face hidden beneath his hood, the Keeper stood motionless, as if carved from stone. Around his neck hung a silver chain holding a pocket watch, its ticking the only sound in the chamber. In his hand, he clutched the hourglass, its sands glowing faintly. Lorien's greed consumed him. Ignoring the warnings etched on the walls, he reached out and grabbed the pocket watch. The instant Lorien touched the watch, the room erupted with a deafening sound, like the gears of the universe grinding together. The Keeper's glowing eyes flared to life, and he turned his hollow gaze upon the thief. "Who dares disturb the flow of time?" The Keeper's voice boomed, resonating with the weight of eternity. Lorien stumbled backward, clutching the watch tightly. I only seek to control my own fate," he stammered. "I don't want to die like this, poor and forgotten." The Keeper tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Time is not yours to command," he said. "To steal it is to disrupt the balance. Do you think you are above its judgment?" "I just want more time," Lorien pleaded. "Enough to make something of myself, to escape this miserable life." The Keeper stepped forward, his skeletal fingers tightening around the hourglass. Then let us see how much time you truly have left. With a wave of his hand, the keeper summoned a massive spectral hourglass. Its sands flowed rapidly, glowing with a pale light. The name Lorien appeared etched in the glass, and the sands began to drain faster and faster. Lorien watched in horror as his life was displayed before him. The moments he had wasted, the lives he had ruined, the greed that had driven him to this moment. The keeper raised his other hand, and Lorien's body was bound in chains made of shimmering light. You sought to steal from time itself, the keeper said. Now you will face its judgment. Choose, repent, and return the time you have taken, or be consumed by the hourglass. Desperate, Lorien fell to his knees. Please, I'll do anything. Just don't take my life. The keeper's glowing eyes dimmed slightly, as though he were considering the plea. Very well, he said. You shall serve as I do. The chains around Lorien tightened, and he felt his body transforming. His flesh withered, his bones hardened, and his vision filled with the endless flow of sands. The pocket watch fused to his hand, and his voice became a hollow echo. You are now a warden of time, the keeper declared. Bound to the hourglass, you will wander the realms, ensuring the balance is kept. Your greed has chained you to eternity. As Lorien's transformation completed, the keeper faded into the shadows, his duty fulfilled for now. Lorien, now a skeletal figure with glowing eyes, stood alone in the temple, his voice echoing with the words of his master. Time waits for no one. To this day, travelers speak of a cloaked figure wandering the edges of the mortal world, holding a glowing pocket watch and whispering the secrets of time. Those who seek to cheat death or steal time often find themselves face to face with the keeper or his warden, their fates sealed in the sands of the hourglass. And in the heart of Eternus Temple, the hourglass continues to glow, its sands flowing endlessly, a chilling reminder that no one escapes the judgment of time. Story 7. The Devil's Dominion. The world had always been on the brink of collapse, teetering between chaos and order. But the night of the blood moon was when it all began to end. The sky turned crimson, and a vortex of black clouds spiraled above the earth, blotting out the stars. From the depths of this cosmic storm, he emerged, Azarath, the demon overlord, a being of unimaginable power and malice. His towering, muscular form loomed over the planet like a deity of destruction. Blood-red horns curved from his head, and his clawed hands grasped the earth as if it were a mere bauble. His glowing, malevolent eyes gazed down at humanity with a mixture of amusement and hunger. Long ago, hidden within the vaults of an ancient monastery, there had been a prophecy. It spoke of a blood moon, a harbinger of the demon Azarath's return. When the moon weeps crimson and the skies break apart, the Lord of Ruin shall rise, it read. He will hold the world in his grasp, and all shall bow or burn. For centuries, the prophecy was dismissed as a mere legend. But as the blood moon ascended the heavens and the ground cracked beneath humanity's feet, the truth of the words became undeniable. Azarath had come, and he had no intention of leaving. As Azarath's colossal hands encircled the earth, his claws pierced the atmosphere, causing earthquakes and volcanic eruptions across the globe. Cities crumbled, rivers boiled, and forests ignited into flames. The demon's booming laughter echoed through the skies, a sound that shattered glass and sent shockwaves across continents. The survivors, those few who hadn't been swallowed by the earth or burned in the chaos, gathered in the ruins of their cities, looking to the crimson sky in terror. Among them was Evelyn, a young scholar who had spent her life studying forbidden texts. She had read of Azarath and the ancient weapon said to be capable of sealing him away. The Sphere of Eternity, a relic lost to time. Evelyn knew that the Sphere of Eternity was humanity's only hope, but she also knew it wouldn't be easy to find. The artifact was hidden deep beneath the ruins of Dalaran, a forgotten city swallowed by the earth centuries ago. Accompanied by a small band of survivors, Marcus, a former soldier, Priya, a healer, and Elias, a rogue scavenger, she set out on a perilous journey to uncover the sphere. Their trek was fraught with danger. The skies rained fire, and Azarath's demonic minions roamed the land, grotesque creatures born of shadow and flame. The group narrowly escaped an ambush by winged beasts with razor-sharp talons, and Marcus sacrificed himself to save the others, his screams echoing as he was dragged into the abyss. After days of treacherous travel, Evelyn and the remaining survivors reached the ruins of Dalaran. The city was a labyrinth of crumbling stone and treacherous caverns, its air thick with the stench of decay. At the heart of the ruins, they discovered the Sphere of Eternity, a glowing orb pulsating with an otherworldly energy. As Evelyn reached for the sphere, the ground trembled, and Azarath's voice filled the cavern. "You think a trinket can stop me?" he roared. "You are but ants beneath my heel." The demon's colossal form appeared in the sky above the ruins, his clawed hand descending to crush them. Evelyn grasped the sphere and felt its power surge through her. The orb spoke to her in a voice that was both ancient and serene. "To wield my power is to sacrifice all," it warned. "Are you willing?" Evelyn hesitated, but as she saw Azarath's hand closing in, she steeled herself. "Yes," she whispered. "For humanity." The sphere's energy enveloped Evelyn, lifting her into the air. Her body glowed with radiant light as the orb's power merged with her own. She became a beacon of hope against the darkness, her eyes shining like twin suns. Azarath laughed, his voice shaking the earth. "You are nothing compared to me." But Evelyn did not waver. She raised her hands, and a beam of pure energy shot from the sphere, striking Azarath in the chest. The demon roared in pain, his massive form faltering as cracks appeared in his skin, glowing with golden light. The battle raged on, Azarath unleashing waves of fire and shadow, while Evelyn countered with the sphere's celestial power. The earth trembled beneath their clash, mountains crumbling and seas rising in turmoil. Finally, with a final desperate surge of energy, Evelyn channeled all of the sphere's power into a single blast. The beam pierced Azarath's heart, and the demon let out a deafening scream as his body disintegrated into ash, his essence banished to the void. As the dust settled, the blood moon faded, and the skies cleared. The earth was scarred but alive. Evelyn, however, was gone, her body consumed by the sphere's power. In her place stood a simple monument, a reminder of her sacrifice. The survivors emerged from the ruins, their faces etched with both grief and hope. They rebuilt their world, carrying with them the memory of Evelyn and the knowledge that even in the face of apocalyptic darkness, humanity could endure. But in the deepest corners of the void, Azarath's essence stirred, whispering a promise. "I will return." Story 8. The Whispering Void. There's a place forgotten by time, a stretch of land where even the bravest dare not tread. It is known only as the Abyssal Hollow, a cursed forest where the air feels thick, the light barely reaches the ground, and whispers echo without source. For centuries, the villagers of nearby Blackthorn avoided the hollow, warning outsiders of the fate that awaited those who entered. They spoke of a spirit, a creature, or something worse. The Whispering Void, a malevolent entity that preyed on the curious and the arrogant. The stories varied, but they all agreed on one thing. Anyone who heard its whispers would never escape. And what remained of them was a grotesque husk, screaming silently into the void. On a chilly autumn evening, 5 college friends, Megan, Eric, Sarah, Liam, and Josh, arrived at Blackthorn. They were drawn to the legend of the Whispering Void, eager to debunk it as another rural myth. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and bravado, they ignored the warnings of the villagers and ventured into Abyssal Hollow. "This place is creepy," Sarah muttered as the group moved deeper into the forest. The air grew colder with each step, and the dense trees seemed to close in around them. "Come on, it's just a story," Eric said, his voice brimming with false confidence. "We'll walk through, get some footage, and be out before midnight." But as they walked, the forest grew unnaturally quiet. No rustling leaves, no chirping crickets, just an oppressive silence. Then they heard it, a faint, disembodied whisper. "What was that?" Josh asked, spinning around. Megan froze. "It's just the wind, right?" The whisper came again, clearer this time, but still unintelligible. It seemed to come from all directions, as if the forest itself were speaking. Liam's flashlight flickered and died. "Stupid batteries," he muttered, shaking it. But when he looked up, the group was no longer together. The others were gone, and he stood alone in the suffocating darkness. "Guys," he called, his voice trembling. The whisper grew louder, words forming in his mind rather than his ears. "Why do you call when you cannot leave?" Panic set in as Liam stumbled backward, tripping over a root. The ground beneath him felt soft and wet, and when he looked down, he realized it wasn't dirt. It was flesh. Pale, decayed hands reached up from the ground, clawing at his legs. He screamed, but the forest swallowed the sound. Meanwhile, the remaining 4 tried to stick together, their flashlights cutting through the fog that seemed to thicken with every step. "We should go back," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "We shouldn't be here." "Just a little further," Eric insisted. "We'll prove there's nothing here." But Megan stopped suddenly, her eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. The group listened. It wasn't just one whisper now. It was many, overlapping, rising and falling like a chorus of tortured souls. The whispers became screams, and the air grew heavy with the stench of rot. Out of the darkness emerged a figure, a grotesque, skeletal being, its face twisted into a permanent scream. Its hollow eyes burned with an unnatural light, and its jaw hung open, unnaturally wide. From within its mouth, more hands reached out, clawing at the air as if desperate to escape. The creature moved closer, its whispers invading their minds. Megan dropped her flashlight and clutched her head. "Get out of my head!" she screamed, collapsing to her knees. Eric grabbed her arm, trying to pull her up, but the creature lunged. Its hands stretched impossibly far, grabbing Megan's face. Her screams were cut short as her mouth opened wide, and the creature's skeletal hands plunged inside, dragging her into its maw. Her body convulsed before crumpling lifelessly to the ground, her face frozen in a silent scream. Sarah and Josh ran, their breaths ragged, leaving Eric behind as he fought the creature. The whispers followed them, louder now, mocking them with their own voices. Josh tripped over a root, falling hard to the ground. Sarah turned back to help him, but it was too late. The creature emerged from the shadows, its hollow eyes locking onto them. Its voice was no longer a whisper, but a deafening roar. "You cannot escape. You are mine." Sarah grabbed a fallen branch and swung it at the creature, but it passed through its skeletal form like smoke. The creature's clawed hands wrapped around Josh, lifting him into the air. His screams echoed as his face twisted into the same horrific, eternal scream as the others. Sarah ran, tears streaming down her face. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, and every direction led her deeper into the abyss. The whispers grew softer, more intimate, as if the forest itself was inside her mind. By dawn, Sarah stumbled out of the forest, her clothes torn and her face pale. She collapsed at the edge of Blackthorn, mumbling incoherently. The villagers found her and tried to comfort her, but all she could say was, "The whispers. They never stop." She was the only survivor, but she was not free. The whispers stayed with her, growing louder each night. In her dreams, she saw the creature's skeletal face, its hollow eyes, and its endless hunger. Weeks later, Sarah disappeared. Some say she returned to Abyssal Hollow, drawn by the whispers. Others believe the forest came for her, its tendrils stretching into the mortal world to claim what was theirs. The legend of the Whispering Void lives on, a chilling reminder that some places are not meant to be explored. And if you ever hear a faint whisper in the woods, run. For the void hungers, and it never forgets. Story 9. The Nun of the Shadows. In the quiet, desolate village of Blackmore, there was a monastery that stood as a dark silhouette against the endless night sky. Abandoned for decades, it was said to be cursed. A place where whispers of the damned echoed through the halls. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about Sister Nocturne, the Nun of the Shadows, whose glowing eyes pierced through the blackest night. Long ago, the monastery was a place of worship, a sanctuary for the devout. Among the nuns, Sister Nocturne was revered for her unwavering faith and selflessness. Her prayers were said to bring miracles, and her presence filled the halls with peace. But one fateful night, a stranger arrived at the monastery. A wandering priest with hollow eyes and a voice that chilled the soul. He spoke of forbidden knowledge, of prayers that could summon angels but might call demons if spoken with a wavering heart. Intrigued, Sister Nocturne was drawn to his words. She became consumed by the idea of perfect devotion, believing that if she could perform the forbidden prayer without faltering, she could prove her unshakable faith. But as she recited the words in the dead of night, the air grew cold, and the candles around her extinguished. Her voice trembled, and in that moment of doubt, the shadows came alive. The entity that emerged from the darkness was no angel. It consumed her soul, twisting her body into a mockery of her former self. Her once kind face became gaunt and hollow, her eyes glowing like burning coals, and her prayers turned to whispers that lured the weak-hearted into eternal damnation. The monastery fell silent after that night. The nuns who survived fled in terror, and the villagers avoided the grounds. But they knew Sister Nocturne remained, bound to the monastery by the entity she had summoned. She roamed the halls, a figure cloaked in darkness, her glowing eyes the only light in the void. The villagers spoke of hearing her voice on stormy nights, calling out to them, promising salvation if they dared to step inside. Those who entered the monastery were never seen again, their screams echoing through the village as they were swallowed by the shadows. Years later, a group of paranormal investigators arrived in Blackmore, drawn by the legend of the Nun of the Shadows. Led by Alex, a skeptic determined to prove the supernatural didn't exist, the team, Mia, Jordan, and Claire, ventured into the monastery with cameras and equipment. The air grew colder as they stepped inside, their flashlights barely piercing the suffocating darkness. The faint smell of incense lingered, mingling with the stench of decay. "Do you hear that?" Mia whispered. A soft, melodic humming echoed through the halls, growing louder with each step. It was a hymn, hauntingly beautiful and unnervingly wrong. At the end of the corridor, they saw her, a tall figure cloaked in black, her glowing eyes fixed on them. "Sister Nocturne," Alex said, raising his camera. "Are you here to guide us?" The figure tilted her head, her mouth stretching into a twisted grin. "Welcome, children," she whispered. "Will you pray with me?" The team froze as the shadows around them began to move, slithering across the walls like living things. Claire screamed as a tendril of darkness wrapped around her ankle, dragging her into the void. Her screams were cut off abruptly, leaving only silence. "Run!" Alex shouted, but the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly. No matter how far they ran, Sister Nocturne was always there, her glowing eyes watching them, her voice growing louder. Mia fell to her knees, clutching her head as the whispers filled her mind. "She's inside my head," she cried. The shadows engulfed her, leaving nothing behind. Jordan grabbed Alex's arm. "We have to get out of here." But as they turned to flee, they found themselves back in the chapel where they had started. Sister Nocturne stood at the altar, her skeletal hands outstretched. "You cannot leave," she said, her voice echoing. "You called to me, and now you are mine." Desperate, Alex remembered the forbidden prayer he had read about in the village archives. He dropped to his knees, reciting the words aloud. The air grew colder, and the shadows recoiled, but Sister Nocturne's grin widened. "You think to banish me?" she hissed. "Your faith is as weak as hers." As Alex reached the final line of the prayer, Sister Nocturne lunged at him, her claws tearing into his chest. But before she could finish, a burst of light erupted from the altar. The entity screamed, its form unraveling into smoke as the light consumed it. Alex collapsed, gasping for breath. When he opened his eyes, the monastery was silent. The shadows were gone, and the air was warm once more. But he was alone. Mia, Jordan, and Claire were nowhere to be found. Alex stumbled back to the village, his hair white and his eyes hollow. He spoke of the glowing eyes, the whispers, and the shadows, warning everyone to stay away. But the villagers already knew. The curse of Sister Nocturne was eternal. And on stormy nights, when the wind howled through Blackmoor, the villagers still heard her voice, calling out from the darkness, "Will you pray with me?" Story 10. The Jester of the Cosmic Abyss. There is a tale older than the stars themselves, whispered in hushed tones by celestial wanderers and forbidden scribes. It speaks of an ancient being known as the Jester of the Cosmic Abyss, a chaotic entity that exists beyond the boundaries of time and space. Neither god nor demon, the Jester is a trickster, a manipulator, and a harbinger of madness. His skeletal visage is adorned with a twisted crown, his hollow eyes glowing, one with the infernal red of chaos, the other with the icy blue of oblivion. Wherever he appears, reality bends and cracks like a fragile mirror. Eons ago, when the cosmos was still young and the laws of existence had yet to be written, the Jester was born from the collision of chaos and void. He was a creature without purpose, a wanderer in the infinite dark until he discovered the power of laughter. But his laughter was not one of joy or mirth. It was a sound that echoed through the void, unraveling stars and driving sentient beings into madness. The Jester soon realized his power. By twisting reality into his playground, he could toy with existence itself. Worlds became his stage, their inhabitants unwitting actors in his cosmic performance. Some begged for mercy, others attempted to fight him, but all were reduced to nothing more than pawns in his eternal game. In the present day, a group of rogue scientists, obsessed with uncovering the secrets of the universe, stumbled upon an ancient artifact in the ruins of an alien civilization. It was a crystalline orb etched with symbols that glowed faintly when touched. Unbeknownst to them, it was a fragment of the Jester's essence, a relic containing a fraction of his chaotic power. Dr. Eleanor Price, the leader of the group, was the first to activate the orb. As she spoke, the alien incantation engraved upon it, the room filled with a blinding light. The air grew heavy, and an otherworldly laughter echoed through the lab. The light coalesced into a vortex, and from its swirling depths emerged the Jester, his skeletal grin stretched wide. "Ah," he said, his voice a mix of mockery and malevolence. "Mortals playing with forces they do not understand. How delicious." The scientists froze in terror, but it was too late to undo what they had done. The Jester raised his bony hand, and reality within the lab began to warp. Walls twisted into spirals, objects floated and disintegrated, and time itself seemed to fragment. One moment, Eleanor saw her colleagues aging into dust. The next, they were children again, crying in confusion. "You've summoned me," the Jester said, juggling orbs of crackling energy. "Now we play a game. Win, and you may go free. Lose, and you'll join my eternal carnival." "What's the game?" Eleanor demanded, her voice trembling. The Jester's grin widened. "Oh, it's simple. Solve my riddle, but beware. Every wrong answer has consequences." With a snap of his fingers, the lab transformed into a vast, twisted circus. The sky above was a swirling void, and the air was filled with the sound of distorted music. The scientists were trapped, surrounded by impossible geometry and haunting illusions. The Jester floated above them, his voice booming. "Here is your riddle, little mortals. I am the beginning of madness and the end of peace. I am the destroyer of worlds and the source of release. What am I?" The group huddled together, their minds racing. Every second felt like an eternity as the Jester's glowing eyes bore into their souls. "Time?" one of the scientists guessed. The Jester cackled, and with a wave of his hand, the man vanished, replaced by a grotesque puppet with hollow eyes. "Wrong. Try again." "Entropy?" another ventured. The Jester's laughter grew louder, more sinister. The scientist's body disintegrated, leaving behind only a pile of shimmering dust. "No, no, no. You're not very good at this, are you?" Eleanor stepped forward, desperation in her eyes. "It's chaos, isn't it? The answer is chaos." The Jester paused, his grin shrinking ever so slightly. For a moment, the twisted world seemed to hold its breath. "Clever," he said, his voice low, "but not clever enough." He snapped his fingers, and Eleanor was flung into the air, suspended in a web of glowing threads. "Chaos is part of the answer," he continued, "but not the whole. You see, I am more than chaos. I am the abyss. I am the void. I am everything you fear and everything you cannot comprehend." One by one, the scientists fell, their bodies and minds twisted into grotesque parodies of their former selves. Only Eleanor remained, trapped in the Jester's web, her spirit teetering on the edge of madness. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "What do you want?" The Jester's grin returned, wider than ever. "I want everything," he said simply. "Your fears, your hopes, your dreams. And now, you'll join my carnival forever." With a final laugh, he snapped his fingers, and Eleanor's mind shattered like glass. Her body became another puppet in the Jester's macabre collection, dancing eternally in his cosmic circus. The Jester of the cosmic abyss continues to roam the universe, his twisted circus growing with every victim. He is drawn to those who seek knowledge and power, offering them a chance to play his deadly games. His laughter echoes through the void, a sound that drives entire civilizations to madness. And somewhere, in the swirling chaos of his domain, Eleanor's puppet form dances endlessly, a silent witness to the horrors of the Jester's eternal performance. Beware the jester, for his games have no winners, only participants.